we're jumping in, obviously, to week 4 of our series called Painkillers. We're going to talk a little bit more about some risks that we take on our own in a minute. But let me just say this. If you're new here, if we've not had the chance to connect, my name's Ryan. I'm the new guy. I've been around here for about 3, maybe going on 4 weeks. So if you're new, I'm new too. And if we haven't had the chance to meet yet, I would love to fix that today. I'll be in the lobby after service. Would love to connect, shake your hand, just get to know you a little bit. But we've been in this series, if you've not been with us, we've been in this series called Painkillers. And here's what we've been saying along the way in this series, a few things. We said right out of the gate that pain is a part of every relationship that you and I experience, right? Every relationship that you and I have in our life involves pain, right? Why? Because none of us is perfect. And you know this, all of us are friends with imperfect people, right? And so pain is a part of every one of those relationships. We also said, though, that the people we keep close have the tendency or the ability to hurt us the most, right? The people we keep close have the ability to hurt us the most. And in a season like this, right, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, with all of the dinners and all of the parties and all of the gatherings that you are obligated, right, to go to, right, you're going to be around some of those people closer and more often now than you are in other months in your life, right? And as we engage this season, we said this as well. We all find ways to manage that pain, right? You and I all have ways to manage that pain. Sometimes we deal with it, but in many ways we just manage it and kind of hold it at bay. Why? Because you have a life to get to, and I have a life to get to. You wake up in the morning, you got to get kids out the door, you got to get to work, you got to get groceries bought, right? You've got stuff to do. And so you can't just sit around and deal with that pain all the time. And so we all find ways to manage that pain. But we've said this, that managing that pain doesn't take it away. Right? Managing our pain doesn't take it away. It only ever delays it for another day. Right? And that day rarely goes well. In fact, we've said that you and I both know people, have people in our life who spent years managing their pain, felt years kind of carrying it but not dealing with it, spent years holding it at bay. And then one day, something happened that caused all of that to come rushing right back up to the surface. And when it did more damage to them and the people around them than it ever would have if they dealt with it in the past. And we're saying, how can we avoid that in our lives? How can we manage or deal with our pain and handle our hurts in a way and actually process our pain in a way that avoids the challenges that come with holding it at bay for too long? Now, as we jump in today, I just kind of want to say this. All of us has a tendency to manage our pain in different ways. We're in this series, Painkillers, right? We said all of us have different ways to manage our pain, right? But one of the things that I'm finding as we jump into this last week is that even as we process our pain and have processed some hurts that we have in our life through this series, right, it's time to start thinking about how do we actually engage in relationships moving forward? How do we engage in relationships beyond the point of healing and beyond the point of past hurt, right? And there's a process that I would say most, if not all of us, have gone through throughout the journey of our life that has defined in different seasons how we relate to other people. And different experiences have defined how we relate to other people, right? So we started out in life, right? Most of us, almost all of us, probably all of us, started out in life very, very open to the world around us, almost with this childlike innocence, right? There was this thing about you, right? This innocence about you that allowed you to engage with people without fear, without concern, total carefreeness. You just naturally trusted everyone around you, right? Our daughter's 5 right now, but when she was 3 years old, the most difficult part of our day was going to the grocery store. Why? Because Addie just wanted to talk to everybody at the grocery store, right? And we don't shop at Whole Foods, okay? We're buying groceries at like Aldi and Walmart, and I'll just tell you, there are people at Aldi and Walmart who I do not want my 3-year-old talking to. Feel free to judge me, it's fine, but there just are, right? And so we'll be pushing her down the cart, like down the aisle, right? And she's, hello, what's your name? I'm like, Addie, stop, he's creepy. What's creepy, right? Why are you creepy, right? Like, it's just, she has no idea. She has no understanding of the world around her, right? She's just totally wide open to the whole world, this innocence, right, that allows her to be fully open to the world around her. And the same was true of you, right, at one point in your life. And then you began to experience life. And then you began to experience relationships. And then you began to feel just a little bit of pain, right? Somebody hit something. Somebody tapped something, somebody hurt something just a little bit, and you started to trend inward just a little bit into a stage that I would call independence, right? Which is something that we celebrate in our culture. And independence is a great thing. It's something we celebrate, something we kind of hope our kids find and discover. Some of you are still hoping your kids will find and discover, right? A little bit of independence, I get it, right? It's good, but it comes from this place of recognizing, man, like there are people in the world who will hurt me. And so I need to be a little bit more careful and a little bit more cautious about who I allow into my life. And so you found that probably in your late teens early 20s. But as you journeyed in that space a little bit longer, right? At some point along the way, somebody got in there, somebody poked, somebody did something, somebody hurt, that caused you to experience not just like a little bit of hurt, but caused you to experience like real pain in life. Might have been heartbreak, right? That first boyfriend or first girlfriend or first serious relationship, and you thought for sure you'd spend the rest of your life with him or her, and they did something or chose something or made a decision or told you, right? And they created pain in your life. Might have been your first boss, right? And you thought, man, this is going to be a great job. I'm so excited. I've prepared for this. I've got my first job. This is the first step in my career, right? And you jumped into it and realized, oh, like you're not in this for me as much as I thought that you were in this for me. And you experienced real pain. It could have been a friend, right? Somebody you trusted and allowed into your life and then found yourself backstabbed by months, years later, right? And you realize, man, there's people in this life who don't just like hurt me a little bit, but like hurt me in ways that I don't know how to handle and create pain that I'm not sure that I could ever really fully recover from. And when that happened, all of us begin to continue to trend inward towards a point in some way of isolation. Now, when we talk about isolation, most of us would say, hey, I'm not really isolated, right? I don't isolate myself from the world. I'm here today in this room surrounded by hundreds of people. Obviously, I'm not isolated, but I think it's because of the way we define it, right? When I say isolation, most of us think of like a hermit in the woods, right? Nice, shack in the woods, just kind of fully separate from themselves, no running water, completely removed, right? Fully and totally isolated. And a few of you are like, that looks really good right now. Maybe just for a week. Could I have that for just a week? You know what I mean? Like all the parents in the room are like, yeah. But no, most of us though, like we don't find ourselves totally isolated and cut off from the world. You're here in this room right now. We don't isolate like a hermit, right? But in some ways, I would suggest to you, in some ways you do begin to selectively isolate. Maybe not so much like a hermit, but maybe a little bit more like a hermit crab, right? You've seen these things? You guys have seen these, right? I know it's Minnesota, so I just want to make sure. We're all speaking the same language here, right? No. The hermit crab, you ever seen a hermit crab on the beach, right? They come out, they pop out of their shell, they scramble around, they socialize, right? Like they exist in colonies. There are obviously more hermit crabs, so they get to know one another, right? We know that. So they spend time together, right? And you can watch them. They'll run right by you, right? But if you get just a little bit too close, right? They pull back real fast, and they suck themselves into their shell. You might not even be going towards them or even mindful or even care about them. But if they even in the slightest way see you as a threat or something that might cause pain to them, you go, or they go, pull right back in to their shell. And I would suggest that most of us, if not all of us, have an area of our life, right? Not our full life. We're not totally isolated, no. We have an area of our life that is really personal for us, that we hold really closely, that we probably have experienced pain in the past. And we'll engage. You'll show up. We'll have conversations. We'll talk about our riskiest thing we've ever done on our own and jumping off of a roof or going whitewater rafting, right? We'll talk about those things. But if someone asks the wrong question, right? If someone gets just a little bit too close in one area of life, if someone says just the wrong thing or starts getting just a little bit too close to that thing, right? You pull back and you hide. You know who's great at this? Church people. And do you know who you learned it from? Pastors. Okay? We're experts at this. We're experts at like, hey, we'll come into this room, we'll come into this space, and we'll all come and engage, and we'll live our lives on full display, right? And we'll talk and we'll chat. But man, there are pieces of you and pieces of me that if you get just a little bit too close, we're going to pull back. Let me tell you a few things for me that kind of would hit this list. Ways that I would say that I kind of guard and protect myself. Things that I use because I think isolation kind of wears a lot of masks or a lot of shells, right? Ways that we kind of tend to protect or hide ourselves. Ways that I tend to protect or I hide myself, right? A couple of these things right out of the gate. Busyness is one for me, right? Like I just don't have time to fully engage deeply with other people around me, right? Tiredness, I just don't have the energy right now to invest in that relationship, or the energy right now to allow them to get that close to me, right? I'm goal-oriented. Many of you are goal-oriented, right? I've got things to do. I'm driven. I've got a purpose. I've got a mission. And so I don't really have the margin to allow someone to get that close to those pieces of my life, right? Boundaries. I love boundaries. I don't know about you, but I love me a good boundary in a relationship, right? And boundaries can be really good, right, to serve and protect, but sometimes boundaries can be used just to prevent someone else from getting too close in a way that maybe I'm not comfortable, right? Some of us use boundaries. Some of us use faith, which seems a little bit backwards at first. But for some of us, someone comes and they'll ask you all kinds of questions, whatever, but if they ask you about like, how's this going in your life? Hey, I know you've been struggling in this area. How's that going in your life? Hey, I know you've been having a hard season. How's that going in your life, right? You're like, oh, it's hard, but you know what? God's got it. Which is true, but at times a way to deflect the conversation and pretend like you don't feel things that you do and are hurting in ways that you're hurting or struggling with things that you're struggling. And it's a way to deflect and push attention away so that someone can't follow up with a deeper question about you. And all of these ways that we deflect or protect, right? All of it is built around this narrative that we tell ourselves, right? That if I let someone in, I'll be hurt again. If I let someone in, I'll be hurt again because you've experienced real pain. You've experienced real hurt in that piece of your heart. If I let someone in, I want to experience that one more time. If I let someone in, I don't know what they'll say. If I let someone in, I don't know where this could go. If I let someone in, I'll be hurt again. And so we avoid people in that piece of us, right? Sometimes we avoid the person who hurt us. Sometimes we just avoid key relationships so we don't let them get too close. Some of us avoid, right, even things like the church because some of your greatest places of pain have been within the church. And so naturally and understandably, you stay away from spaces like that or you don't get too involved in communities like that. Because those are the spaces and the types of communities that have hurt you before. I was just, that's totally understandable. I totally get it. Right? But it happens. We do it. It's not that you don't engage. It's not that you don't have friends. It's not that you don't have people to hang out with on the weekend, right? It says that in some way those friends are safe friends. They're friends you can laugh with. They're friends you can joke with. They're friends you can tell funny stories with. They're friends you can tell that skydiving story to, right? But you know that there's a piece of you that you won't let them get too close to. Right? And here's the thing about isolation, right? Let me just say this. I get it. I do it. We all have a piece of us that does this. I get it. And it comes with good intentions. It comes with good motives. It comes for a purpose, right? And isolation will serve that purpose. It will protect you from others. But it will also expose you to something worse. Isolation will protect you, but it will expose you to something worse. This pattern in our lives of isolating, it's not new, right? It's a pattern that's been observed for thousands of years. In fact, there's a piece of ancient Hebrew wisdom literature that talks about patterns that exist in the world around us, ways that we engage with the world in the same way over and over again, generation after generation, person after person. Cycles that we go through that lead us always back to the same place. Cycles that we just endlessly repeat, and cycles that continue to repeat themselves. It says these cycles, they're not really leading us to anything. They're leading us to nothing, right? And this wisdom seeker, right, truth teller, right, wrote this book that we know of as Ecclesiastes, right? It's this book that just unearths and describes all of these cycles that exist within our lives, right? Cycles that lead to nothing. And in the 4th chapter of that book, Ecclesiastes, he begins to talk about a set of relational cycles. Cycles that we go through in our relationships, person after person, generation after generation, that always continually lead back to the same place. We're going to dive into that this morning. He says right out of the gate, he says, again, I saw all the oppressions, you can throw that up there, that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed. And they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors, there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. You know, he's basically saying, the world hurts. It's full of pain. It's full of difficulty. It's full of challenge, right? I've seen it. I've experienced it all over the place. And then he begins to talk about some ways that he would say we can upend or shift the ways that we tend to cycle in relationships, because pain often leaves us in a place where we have no one. Pain often leaves us in a place where we're alone. And he starts talking about ways that we can upend those cycles in our relationships. And he gives wisdom there. He says, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. In other words, he's saying, hey, there are going to be times in your life where you make a mistake, times in your life where you have an accident, where you do things that you did not intend to do, and it creates pain to you. And woe to the person who makes a mistake and doesn't have another to come and pick him up. He goes on, he says, again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? As if to say, there are seasons that we go through that we can't control. You can't control the temperature. It's going to get colder. You know that, right? There are things in your life, there are seasons of your life that come upon you that you can't do anything about. And woe to the person who has to go through a season like that by themselves, because protecting yourself from a season that you can't control by yourself is challenging, if at all possible. Right? He goes on to say this. He says, and though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. In other words, there are things that are going to come against you that you can't battle yourself. Right? And then he just doubles down on this. He doubles down on this concept of the proverb. He says a cord of 3 strands, or a threefold cord, is not quickly broken. He starts talking about the ways that if we're going to upend the cycles that exist in our life, upend the damage that we experience in our lives, we've got to begin to let other people in. But then he goes on from here, and this is my favorite part. He begins to tell a cautionary tale. Now, I'm going to be real honest with you. I almost didn't include this passage that we're going to jump into here in just a second. I almost didn't include this portion of the text because it's a little bit confusing when you first read it. And I don't know about you, but I'll tell you this about me. This is true, right? I don't know if you ever sit down and you just go to read your Bible and you're reading through and you're cruising along. It's all tracking. And then you get to a paragraph and you read it and you go, what was that? I have no idea what he said. Then you just skip right over and just go on to the next paragraph and keep moving, right? Come on, do it too, right? This next paragraph is one of those. When we read it for the first time, it's a little bit confusing. It takes some time to sit in and soak in, to really track with it. But in moments like that, where things find themselves either confusing or just feel like they don't mean anything when you read it, usually the meaning is in the details. And we're going to spend a little bit of time, just a couple of minutes, in the details today. And I think what we do, we're going to find something valuable for us. Okay? But as we read this text, let's read it together. But let's do this. Let's throw it up there real fast. This is the paragraph. Here's what I want to do, just to kind of get us tracking with this, because I do a lot of reading, right? So here's what I ask you to do. I'm going to read the words in white, but I'm going to ask you to read the words in yellow. Can you help me with that? Come? You good with me? All right, I'm going to read the white. You're going to read the yellow. Ready? Better was a than an who no longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been poor, or had been born poor. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was I took your job and you took it back. Nice work. He said there was no end of all the people, all of whom he led. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is. Okay. So the first time you read that, you go, huh? What's this dude talking about? There's a ton of pronouns. There's a ton of side comments, right? It's kind of I don't know, you ever have a conversation with your spouse and they're telling you a story and you're like, I feel like I just heard 3 stories in one. And I'm trying to figure out who goes with which story and all that, right? Okay, so let's unravel this for a minute. Because what he's actually doing is calling out some things I think are really, really meaningful and super rich for us. So right out of the gate, he tells us about 2 characters, right? He tells us about a poor youth who was wise and a king who was old and foolish. He's intentionally describing both of these individuals with 3 sets of opposites. One is poor, the other is a king. One is youthful, the other is old. One is foolish, the other is wise. But there's something that stands out when you look at these opposites, because the last set of opposites is in reverse of how it should be, right? Because don't we equate wisdom with age? And don't we equate foolishness with youth? In fact, if you read other Hebrew wisdom literature, it will continually talk about wisdom that comes with age. It will talk to young men and say, hey, listen to those who have come before you, right? It will constantly push young, foolish individuals towards older, wise people in their lives, right? Because we equate wisdom with age. But the author here is intentionally writing this in reverse to catch our attention, which causes us to ask the question, why is the old king foolish? Because he no longer knew how to take advice. Now, he once did. He no longer knew. It's not that he never knew, right? He no longer knew how to take advice. There was a time in his life where he was quite open, right? There was a time in his life where people could speak in. There was a time in his life where he could receive, right? But he's lived a lot of life. And as he's lived, he's experienced things. And as he's lived, he's held hurt. And as he's lived, he's seen the challenges and the pain that comes with letting other people in. And as he's grown old, he's no longer listening. And as he's no longer listening, he's become foolish. The author goes on to tell us a little bit more. He says, for he went from prison to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been poor, or been born poor. This is referring back to the wise youth, right, who started in the prison, right, even worse than being poor. Right? And then ascended to the throne. The author says, I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. He's going, this young, wise youth is going to succeed the king. Right? He says, I saw the living, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. He says, there was no end of all the people, all of whom he led. That word led there is not just talking about all the subjects throughout the kingdom. It's talking about the people who stand before him. The literal translation is to stand before. So those who are standing before him in the palace to give him wise advice, to speak him. There was no end to the people who surrounded him to be able to support and help and aid his leadership, right? Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. He's young and he's wise today. He's receiving all of it today. But those who come into his life later will not rejoice into him in the same way. Why? Again, it's all about cycles. Because he too will experience the world. And this young ruler too will experience hurt, pain, challenge, hardship. And he too will follow the same pattern of the king who came before him. And he too will find himself closed and isolated and foolish. Right? This is all a cautionary tale, not for the sake of a king and a young, wise man, right? But for the sake of us. The author's trying to warn us. He's trying to tell us that, hey, there's a cycle that the world goes through and that people goes through and that everyone goes through, and you aren't immune to it either. It's as if he would say to us, isolation will protect you from others, but it will expose you to yourself. And when it does, when you begin to shut down, when you begin to close yourself off, you, not others, but you become the greatest source of your pain. You start making decisions on your own and making mistakes on your own and falling on your own in ways and places that there is no one to pick you back up. You start having thoughts and having to process those things and carrying weights and anxieties without anyone to carry those weights with you. You start going through cold or difficult or challenging seasons by yourself without someone to endure and weather that storm with you. You start facing attack without anyone around you to help defend you. And ultimately you, not the people who have hurt you, but you, become the greatest challenge, the greatest source of pain to you. Isolation will protect you, but it will expose you to you. So there has to be another way. There has to be a way for us to upset the trend that we go on, for us to upend the cycle that we all go through. And the only way I know is this. At some point and in some way, we have to begin to trade isolation for vulnerability. We have to trade closing ourselves off for letting others in. We have to choose to open ourselves back up to the perspective and the wisdom and the voice and the truth of others in our life. We have to choose to take the risk. Maybe not with everybody in our life, right? Like we just go around like an open book to everyone that we meet, right? But we have to choose to trust a few. And it's an intentional choice because we will always drift towards isolation. We will always trend towards closing ourselves off. And we have to intentionally choose to open ourselves back up, to take the risk, to let them ask the question and not feel like we have to deflect, to go to them and open up and say, hey, can I talk to you about something that I'm carrying right now? To call them and say, hey, this just happened, and I don't know what to do about it, but I know that I can't carry it alone. To open back up, to take the risk, to choose to trust a few. And let me say this about vulnerability. And I'll just tell you this. This is like me. I want to be fully honest and transparent with you. We could celebrate vulnerability. We could put it on a shelf, and we could say, put it on stage and say, like, it's the best thing in the world, and your life will never suck if you're vulnerable, right? Let's be honest with you, right? Vulnerability will hurt you in a season. It will. But it will protect you for a lifetime. You and I, we've said this for 4 weeks, and it's true. You and I experience pain in every relationship that we're in. We do. And opening ourselves up to a few is not going to protect us from that pain. It will create moments of hurt in your life. What I'd say to you is that the risk that comes with that and the hurt that will come with that in moments and potentially in seasons is worth it for a lifetime. Because if you avoid the hurt of a season, you will find pain in a lifetime that you can't carry on your own and that someone else won't have the chance or the opportunity to carry with you. So as we wrap up today, let me ask you, give you just a couple of questions to take with us, right? First one's this: where do you drift towards isolation over vulnerability? For most of us, I'd say all of us, there's a piece of our life that we hold close. There's a piece of our life that we go, I'm willing to let you in here. We talk about my career. We talk about my family. We talk about this. But you talk about my parents. No. All that close. Right? You can ask me about anything in my past except for that moment. Some of us tell stories about ourselves, and we tell 90% of the story, or tell stories about things that happened to us, right? And we tell 90% of the story, but there's still 10% that we keep for ourselves, right? Where do you drift toward isolation over vulnerability? Next, what do you withhold in order to protect? What do you keep from others in order to protect yourself? And lastly, I'd say most importantly, who are your few? Who are the people in your life who you can choose to trust fully and openly? And it's a choice. It's a choice. Because trust is given just as much as it's earned. And people can't earn our trust until we give them our trust to earn it, right? And so who are the few that you're choosing to trust, to allow fully into you and go, hey, you're going to know all of me. You're going to see all of it, the good and the bad, the frustration and the pain. Who are you choosing to trust to let in? Who are your few? Can I tell you real quick what I hope for our church as we continue in this season, right? I'm a month in. We got many months and years to go. Right? Can I tell you what I hope for us? We're going to grow bigger. We are. Our church is, because it already is, okay? Even today, there's about 30, 40% more people in the room than there were a month ago. We are growing bigger, and we will continue to grow bigger. And there's a lot of people in our community that we want to make an impact on. And so I expect that we will continue to grow bigger. What I hope for our church, what I hope for you, just as importantly, is as we grow bigger, that we also grow smaller. As we grow wider, that you also get deeper. And that each of us has people in our life who we're not just gathering with on a Sunday morning at 10 a.m., but who we're sitting across a coffee table from on Tuesday at 1, right? Who we're sitting in a living room with on a Friday at 6:30, right? Who we're calling at 1 in the morning when something happens or we can't sleep, right? My hope and my desire for you, and for everyone who walks into our church in the years to come, is not just that we would share this space, but that you and I, that we would also have our few, and that as we grow bigger, we would also grow smaller. So, let me pray for us. Let me pray for you as we wrap up our time together. God, I thank you for this room. God, I thank you for the space. I thank you for this church and what you're doing here in our lives. God, I'm so excited by what's happening here. I'm so excited by all of the faces that I get to meet. So excited by the joy that's in this space and the things that you're doing. God, the ways that we are already sharing life together here. And God, I know that you're going to continue to build this space. God, I know that the hearts of this room are to continue to draw and reach. God, as we draw and reach, God, I'm excited to see us grow bigger, but God, would you continue to move us closer to a few? God, for the person in the room who's experienced pain that I can't imagine. God, would you begin to give them the strength and the courage to trust? God, by your Spirit, would you reassure them that when they open themselves up to others, they're not doing that alone, that they're doing it with you? God, as we engage in our marriages, God, for those of us in the room who go back to a spouse tonight, God, if there's a piece of our heart or a piece of our life that we've been withholding, God, would you give us the courage to sit and to share and to open ourselves back up to one of the people in our lives who we chose to allow to be the closest? God, for those of us who just find ourselves in need of a friend to share life's hardest seasons with, God, would you bring that person into our life? God, would you bring those people around us, and would you give us the courage to be vulnerable and to open ourselves back up, to let them in, and to journey life together? God, would you protect us from ourselves through the gift of community? God, we love you. We thank you for this. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.